Pocket Mortys, a Rick and Morty game primarily based on Pokemon, where instead of catching different types of Pokemon, you catch different types of Mortys and battle them against each other, like you would in Pokemon. And the cool thing was that this game was solely a mobile game, having both a single player campaign and a multiplayer mode where you could battle other real players. But sadly, on April 13th, 2026, it was completely taken down after being on the App Store for an entire decade. And getting a word of this, I knew I had to try and make the most of this game before it was gone forever. So join me as I complete every achievement, try to catch as many Mortys as possible, and nearly reach the #1 rank in its multiplayer mode. Oh, and quickly, about 86% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed, so if you end up enjoying the video, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Okay, enough yap, let's begin. The game starts off in the garage where Morty is just pacing back and forth while Rick is standing at a desk, and after a couple of seconds, Rick asks Morty to stop pacing and hand him a screwdriver. And this screwdriver was for a device that Rick was building called a Morty pad. And this Morty pad is able to collect data in all the Mortys we're going to meet. So basically like a Pokédex. But then Rick also mentions that all the Mortys across the dimensions are being separated from their Ricks, which then out of nowhere a portal appears and a Rick named Mysterious Rick appears out of it with a Morty, claiming that he's here to capture this Morty. And at first Rick just tells Morty to go along with him as he doesn't want a Rick-tastrophe, but then Morty tells him to stop him. So Rick steps in saying that this is his Morty, which makes the Mysterious Rick challenge us to a battle. And as we enter the battle with the Mysterious Rick, we see that his Morty is a stray cat Morty, and thankfully it's of common rarity, which is the lowest rarity in the game. But before we could get into the battle, Mr. Poopy Butthole appeared and told us how to attack. And using his advice, we used this attack named Outburst, which ended up taking the stray cat Morty down to 2 health. And this was most likely because our Morty was of exotic rarity, which is the rarest in the game. And so after one more attack, we defeated the stray cat Morty, earning 19 XP. And since that was the only Morty the Mysterious Rick had, we ended up winning and getting 45 Schmeckles. And the Schmeckles are basically the currency we use to buy all the different items in the game. But getting back to the story, the Mysterious Rick runs away through the portal saying that he needs to train his Mortys and become stronger. And this is where Rick starts to explain to Morty that we need to go out and capture more Mortys, because if we don't, the Mysterious Rick is gonna be back. And next time, he'll be so strong that we can't defeat him and this Morty will end up getting captured. So with that being our only option, we headed to the portal and we appeared in this weird landscape where we first saw this thing on the ground, and clicking on it, we got a Morty manipulator chip. And in Pokemon terms, this is basically a Pokeball, and it's the only Pokeball in the game. And after unlocking the chip, we walked up a little bit, seeing another wild Morty. So we approached it and waited till it stopped panicking, and then walked up to it, clicking on it, and it appeared to be a baby Morty. And this was sort of the tutorial from Mr. Poopy Butthole on how to use our Morty manipulator chips. Basically what you want to do is get the Morty to low health and then go in your inventory to use the Morty manipulator chip, which gets injected onto the Morty, and after a few seconds the chip will turn green if you captured the Morty. So baby Morty was added to our party, and after stepping a few paces to the right, we run into a non-skippable NPC who immediately challenges us to a battle with this mustache Morty. And this battle is where we're explained the typing in all the different Mortys, and thankfully the game developers kept it pretty simple, with the typings being rock, paper, and scissors, where of course scissors beats paper, paper beats rock, and rock beats scissors. Oh, and it actually doesn't say it here, but there is a 4th typing, which is just normal typing. Basically they aren't super effective against any Mortys, but they aren't weak to any either. And our normal Morty that we have is a normal type. And since the mustache Morty is a scissor typing, the smart move for us here was switching over to the baby Morty, who was a rock type. And then we used the move named Vomit, which was a rock type move. And since it was super effective, or in this game sensational, it ended up one-shotting the mustache Morty. And beating the NPC, we got 60 Schmeckles and 1 serum. And the serums are basically health potions. But afterwards, walking down, we see this weird platform. And this is sort of the boss fight platform of every dimension. And I'll explain what that sentence means a little later on. As for now, we had another battle with Mysterious Rick and his stray cat Morty, and we completely annihilated him again, unlocking some different items, but most importantly, this badge. And after getting this badge, a portal opened up behind the Mysterious Rick, which teleported us to a place named the Citadel of Ricks. And Rick said that this was a bad place to be and we should get out of here as soon as possible, but we were immediately caught and they seized our portal gun. And they seized it because apparently we engaged in a Morty battle with the possession of an unlicensed portal gun, which then Rick 4 starts to explain that Morty battles have become a craze and only the most respected Morty battlers can have a portal gun. And this is basically where we get assigned our quest of earning badges and then coming back to these guys to defeat them in battles, because the 6 Ricks you see on top of the chairs are basically the gym trainers of this game. And after some more yapping, we're finally able to leave, getting to the outside of the Citadel, where Rick says that we need to go to the healing center, which we found pretty quickly, so we healed our Mortys up, and then we made our way to this one portal that's in the middle of the citadel. And remember when I mentioned dimensions and the badges that you earn at the end of them? That's basically the main premise of the game, where you enter different dimensions each time you enter that portal, and within these dimensions you fight different NPCs who have all different types of Mortys, and after defeating the Mortys you get XP and unlock different items to help you on your journey. But before I get too far into explaining it, I should also explain what the 100% of this game is. There's basically 17 achievements, which one we first got when we captured our first Morty, and then there's also achievements which range from earning badges, defeating trainers, and leveling up our Mortys, with also some hidden achievements. But you'll soon realize that the hidden achievements aren't very hidden. But for now, getting back into the dimension, alongside the NPCs slash trainers, you can also find wild Mortys to capture, which our real first wild Morty ended up being the Martian Morty. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know it at the time, but this was a crazy Morty to get for our first one. And you're gonna see that this one carries us basically throughout the entire game. But for now, we captured it, making our way down, running into another NPC, who we again completely annihilated, and then we once again saw the massive stage. And within this stage, you're always gonna find a different type of Rick. And if you remember, the Council of Rick said that we needed to collect badges and then come fight them. And this stage within each dimension is where we get all our different badges. I'm not gonna lie, this guy had a pretty cursed Morty, the Hashling Morty, which looked like a creature in pain. So we put it out of its misery, collecting the badge, and then entering through the portal back to the Citadel of Ricks. But before we made it too far, we ran into this guy named Investment Rick. And this guy you can basically give your schmeckles to, and after a certain amount of time, he'll give you a pretty decent return. But you'll soon see that this actually didn't matter to me, and I'll explain that reason a little later on as well. And for now, as I didn't really know what was in the Citadel, I decided to explore a little bit. And first, I ran into this place called the Morty Labs. And this guy is basically the move trainer of this game. So if you accidentally didn't learn a move or want to learn a different move, you come to that guy. My second stop was this place called the Daycare. And this is kind of like your PC where you can store all your Mortys that you capture. There's also this feature of combining where you combine the two Mortys that ups their rarity and gives them a level boost. And the last feature within the Daycare is this training thing where you can put your Mortys into it, and after a certain amount of time they gain XP. But I never really end up using this one. And after this stop to the Daycare, I headed up where I ran into the healing center again. And my reason to heal my Mortys here was because after collecting that first badge, I could challenge the first gym battle, which was Rick Prime. And I didn't really do much training of my Mortys, so I thought this might have been difficult, but then he pulled out this Morty named the Exo Alpha Morty at level 6. And since it was a scissor type, I chose to throw out my baby Morty who was a rock type, and using the vomit move, I ended up one-shotting it. The second Morty Rick Prime threw out was the Spooky Morty, and I didn't really know the typing of it, but I still wanted to try the other new Morty I had, which was the Martian Morty, so I threw it out. And I got pretty lucky here because the Spooky Morty was a paper typing, but then right after I realized that my Martian Morty didn't have any scissor type attacks, and it still somehow dealt over half his health. And then with another attack, we took down the Spooky Morty, meaning we'd won our battle against Rick Prime, getting our first hidden achievement, which was defeating the first council member. And that's what I meant by all the hidden achievements aren't actually very hidden, because this is defeating all the council members. And though for Rick Prime's battle we only needed one badge, the next council member actually required 6 badges in total, so we would have to go through 5 more of those dimensions to battle the next council member. But for now, Mr. Poopy Butthole appeared on our screen saying that we had some coupons that we could spend. So we clicked on this button that said win Mortys and opened this green ball, which gave us 3 Mortys and 1 rare guaranteed. And we got some pretty interesting on with the Pizza Morty, Tentacle Morty, and lastly Atlantis Morty. But before we could add them to our team, the president started talking to us, and he needed an item called a Fleeb that apparently we had in our inventory, and he needed it for top secret purposes. So he asked us to meet us in a private place. And after some exploring, we found him in this weird corner, and after giving him the Fleeb that he needed, he gave us 3 Morty manipulator chips. And as the tutorial fully hadn't ended yet, we actually had one more thing to go to, which was the multiplayer mode of this game. So I chose a name for myself and made it to the multiplayer area where I could see other players walking around. And for now, I didn't do too much around the multiplayer area and just kind of explored. And I found this one thing, which basically was a battle arena, and it had a leaderboard for the best Morty trainers. So I knew that I was going to have to come back here and try to reach the top at some point. But for now, I couldn't really do anything as I only had 1 Morty in my possession, since the multiplayer and the campaign are completely separate and you have to capture different Mortys for each section. And the battle arena requires you to have 5 Mortys in your possession to compete. But leaving the battle arena, I saw this message at the bottom by some random person who wanted to battle. So I decided to accept the request. And for some reason, their Morty was at half health, so I kind of ended up annihilating him. And this actually leveled up my character to level 2, which for now it doesn't matter, but it is all important information for way later on. Oh, and I also saw that there was a place you could could change your character into anything you wanted, and my choice was Pickle Rick, who basically just hovers around. But for now, that was enough multiplayer as we had a campaign to get back to, and instantly I went back into the portal area, entering a completely new dimension. And in this dimension was when I realized that the Mortian Morty was the best Morty I had in my possession, because one, she had more health than my normal Morty and she was one level lower, and looking deeper into his stats, I saw that its attack at 20 was a whole 11 points more than the baby Morty, and then also 5 points higher than the regular Morty. Even her speed was 6 points higher, with the only advantage the normal Morty had was 1 point in defense. And I'm not gonna lie, the Tentacle and Atlantis Mortys were kinda just mid. And eventually I did make it to the last battle of this dimension, which our opponent was Cyclops Rick, who sent in this abomination of a Morty named the Carcinogenic Morty. And even though it was a rock type against my scissor type, I took its health down to 2 because of a critical hit, and its attack also got me down pretty low to 11 health. But I knew that my Morty would win because it had more speed. But then it sent in another Carcinogenic Morty, and though we got it down to 6 health with the flail attack, this time my Mortian Morty did not have enough health to survive its attack. And unfortunately my normal Morty was pretty low on health as well, so I had to send in my baby Morty to start off. And it nearly died to the Carcinogenic Morty's attack, but thankfully it was able to get an attack of its own in and defeat it. But this was nowhere near the end, as the Cyclops Rick still had 2 Mortys in its possession, and one of them was still an exotic. And as my baby Morty was pretty low on health, I decided to switch out into the Atlantis Morty, who took a pretty big hit from the Mortox Morty, but then using its wet tongue attack, it dealt a pretty decent amount of damage as well. But this was definitely a lose situation for the Atlantis Morty because the Mortox Morty outsped, leaving us basically with the Tentacle Morty. And we got pretty lucky here because the Mortox Morty outsped, but then it used a pretty useless attack and I was able to defeat it, mainly because the Tentacle Morty was super effective against it. And very luckily the last Morty that the Cyclops Rick had was a common, which could have been bad because of his scissor typing against my paper typing, but then somehow my engulf attack one-shotted it, meaning we collected another badge. So we made it back to the Citadel through the portal, and again, before we could make it far, we ran into Jerry, who apparently had run out of batteries in his TV remote and he couldn't find any replacements in the house, so he needed our help finding a battery. And at this point we didn't have a battery, so we couldn't help him out, but we told him we'd keep our eyes out looking for it in the other dimensions. And for now, as most of my Mortys were fainted, or as in this game they call it dazed, I made my way to the healing center. And at this point was when I remembered seeing something in the Win Morty section, and that's the fact that everything in here was free. So I got a little curious and ended up opening the rarest thing there was, getting some items that I'd never seen before and some pretty high rarity Mortys. But even after opening it, everything was still free. So getting a little curious, I went to do some research and I ended up finding out that since the game was shutting down, the devs made everything in the game free. That was actually why I was able to choose any character I wanted in the multiplayer mode as well. And remember when I mentioned that the schmeckles don't actually matter for me in this gameplay? And that was because you can't use them on anything as everything is free. And alongside making everything cost nothing, they also made the exotic and epic Mortys very common to find. And that was the reason that I actually found the Mortian Morty when I did. But this was actually something that I didn't realize until way later on. I thought that finding the rare Mortys was just a part of the game, so you're gonna just see me constantly abusing these powers. But I did make one restriction for myself, which was only allowing myself to open the exotic capsules once every time I beat a council member. So I couldn't just spam open them and look for the best Mortys in the game. But you're gonna see soon that it didn't really even matter that I opened any more of the capsules, because you're gonna see at some point the Mortian Morty becomes overpowered and just solos the rest of the game. But for now, I'd switched my team up a little bit after opening up the exotic capsule and went to the portal, entering another dimension. Remember those items that I'd gotten from the exotic capsule? I ended up using them on the Mortian Morty because they ended up being stat boosts. And again, at this point, I didn't realize how much of stat boosts they were and kind of just spammed them onto the Mortian Morty. But getting curious, I did a little test, and before using my defense seeds, I looked at its defense, which was at 16. And after feeding the Mortian Morty 2 defensive seeds, I checked its stats and it ended up going from 16 to 36, meaning that each seed increases the stat by 10 points, which is genuinely insane. And this wasn't actually something the developers added because they were shutting down the game. These seeds kind of just did this normally, and I don't really know why, because it allowed the Mortian Morty, being a scissor type, to one-shot rock types like the Carcinogenic Morty. Oh, and after defeating this veiny Morty, the Mortian Morty got to level 10, which allowed us to unlock another achievement. Oh, and trainers that specialized in paper type Mortys kind of stood no chance. They all sorta just got one shot. And at this point, I wasn't even using any scissor type attacks. And I'm showing this battle in particular because you'd think that the seeds are a rare thing to get since I got it from the exotic capsule, but then I ended up getting a speed seed from this battle. And this was just a random NPC within a dimension. And I realized that my strategy at this point was just going to be giving all the stat boosts to the Mortian Morty, in a way making it unstoppable even against the strongest of Mortys. So I quickly gave it the speed mega seed as well, and eventually made it to the final battle of this dimension. But before I went to battle, I realized that I could actually change my avatar in the campaign as well. And this time, instead of going for normal Pickle Rick, I chose to go with Rat Suit Pickle Rick. The episode that we got to see Rat Suit Pickle Rick was probably my favorite episode in the entire series. It was genuinely a peak episode. But that's enough show talk, as we just been challenged by Beard Rick. And the first Morty he sent out was the Armomaly Morty. Basically the combination of the word arm and anomaly. Because you can't really tell here, but that Morty only has one arm and a head. I'm not gonna lie, this game has some insane Mortys in it. But after defeating the Armomaly Morty, we ran into a pretty normal looking one named the pocket-sized Morty. And this was actually the newest Morty added. And I'm pretty sure this was the Morty added as sort of a goodbye. Mainly because it had an attack named Thanks for Playing, which is an attack that deals damage but also gives your attacks an increased chance of dealing a critical hit. And it ended up one-shotting my Cronenberg Morty. And this was when I realized that that pocket-sized Morty was insane. Because unlike our Mortian Morty, that pocket-sized Morty didn't have any stat boosts. It was basically on its normal stats one-shotting my Mortys. And it didn't just stop at that first Cronenberg Morty, it even one-shot my Wasp Morty, my Nerd Morty, and then even my exotic normal Morty, which at this point I was pretty positive it was going to one-shot my Mortian Morty as well. But I had something devious planned, because I remembered that I had an item that I unlocked earlier named the Mr. Meeseeks box. And if you read its description, it basically says it instantly defeats any Morty. And that's not an exaggeration, because it will literally take out any Morty right after you use it. I genuinely don't know why that item exists. And I'm mentioning it here because it becomes one of the more important things when I enter the multiplayer mode. But of course, we'll get to that later on. As for now, I exited the portal, again running into Jerry, who this time I'd actually found a battery for. And in return, he gave me another attack mega seed. The game was just handing these things out like crazy. But after using it, I quickly made it to the healing center as 4 out of my 5 Mortys were dazed. And then continued my grind through the portals as I still needed 2 more badges until I could fight the next council member. And there's times like this where you'll enter a dimension and then find the podium with the Rick boss on it right away. And these were genuinely amazing because they'd save you so much time, as a lot of the other dimensions have so many NPCs that you can't skip. Oh, and this time my opponent was Doofus Rick, who first sent out a Morty named a Lil Bits Morty, and then sent out a Scruffy Morty, which also got destroyed pretty easily. His third Morty was a Parade Morty, who actually tanked the hit a lot better than the previous 2, but the second attack quickly took it out, with the last Morty being sent in being Squid Face Morty. I don't even know if all these Mortys exist within the show or if the developers just started doing random things, but at least they're creative. And after getting the badge and exiting the portal, I ran straight to the healing center, but wasted no time as I immediately sprinted back to the portal. And this dimension seemed pretty comfy with a lot of pink plants around, but the comfiness was quickly overtaken as I ran into this Morty named the Mouth Morty. And this thing isn't even a Morty, it's just a mouth. And for some reason, as my last battle before the second council member was Mysterious Rick once again, who was complaining about the council members not letting him battle them and that he'd show them that he's the best Rick. But as I was kind of destroying his team and wiped them all out without losing a single HP point on my Morty, that thing about him being the best was seeming pretty unlikely. And this also meant that we had enough badges to fight the next council member. So, healing my Mortys, I headed into the Citadel building, where waiting for us was Quantum Rick. And the first Morty he sent out was the No Eye Morty, who unluckily for him was a Paper Morty against my Scissor Morty, so it nearly got one shot, leaving it at 1 HP, but Quantum Rick called him back, sending in an Unkempt Morty, which was definitely a better decision as it's a rock type, but I still dealt basically 75% of his health, and my second attack was quickly able to take it out. And the Unkempt Morty didn't attack because his attack phase was used on healing the No Eye Morty for 20 HP, which honestly was a pretty bad move by Quantum Rick, because whenever the No Eye Morty came back in, we one-shotted it anyways. And then he sent in a Beard Morty, which for some reason is a Scissor type, and that was also one of the other things I didn't understand for a lot of the Mortys, because some of them were giving typings that didn't really make any sense. I mean, the Beard Morty sort of made sense, because you could say the scissors were for cutting the beard, but it still feels a little weird. Though, again, I wasn't really complaining, as it was really easy to understand. Unlike Pokemon, where there's like 18 different types and they each have different things that they do to each other. And being a Pokemon fan for half of my life, I still don't even understand all of them. But on the brighter side, I'd gotten the second hidden achievement, which was defeating the second council member. And defeating the second council council member meant that I could open up another exotic capsule, which of course normally wouldn't be possible, but I was just taking advantage of the opportunity I was given. And I didn't actually get anything important anyways. But after opening the capsule, I also saw this thing on the top which said the Morty game's now opened. And this was a pretty cool feature in the game because there was these different chapters that you could choose from, which I chose the headism movement. And in this, you can't bring in your own Mortys, but you can pick 3 from an option of 5. And so I kind of just went for a balanced team with picking a paper, scissor, and a rock type. And the Morty games are basically a tournament where you're put up against 3 different opponents, and there's just an audience of Ricks on the left and right watching the battle. And as you progress through the battles, defeating all the different opponents with their 3 Mortys, you're eventually rewarded schmeckles and coupons. And so though this was fun, I realized quickly that this wasn't really needed for me because the coupons don't do anything. If you remember, the coupons are used for the capsules, but since the capsules are free, the coupons don't do anything for me. So I headed back into the dimensions to earn my other badges. As for my next council fight, I would need 11 badges, meaning I need 5 more dimensions again. And the Rick fight in this dimension was against a Rick named Zero Rick, who sent out a semi-scary exotic Morty named the Scaly Morty. But as my Morty was 2 levels higher and stat boosted a crazy amount, we took it down pretty easily. Which then he sent in this cone-shaped Morty, which I think is pronounced the Tenenbaum Morty. And again, like the Mouth Morty, I don't even know if you can consider this a Morty anymore. But either way, we pretty easily defeated it. And then Zero Rick sent in the animatronic Morty, another one who's defeated using my Mind Rage ability. And I haven't mentioned it, but the Mind Rage ability was my first ability that I unlocked with the Mortian Morty that was a scissor attack, which like I mentioned, makes the paper Mortys completely useless. And after exiting the portal, I decided to explore the Citadel a little more and ran into this Rick named the Robot Rick who needed a power source. And after helping him out, he gave us a pretty important item which was named the Level Up Mega Seed. And this basically levels up your Morty 1 level whenever it's fed to it. So basically like a rare candy from Pokemon. And though this item wasn't very significant for this point in the game, kind of like the Mr. Meeseeks box, it becomes very important when we enter the multiplayer mode. So I thought I'd just take the time to introduce it now. But afterwards, we entered another dimension, actually running into another Mortian Morty in the wild, which I decided to capture, but actually never ended up adding it to the party. And eventually, after defeating some NPCs, I made it to the Rick of this dimension named Bubblegum Rick, who first sent out probably the most normal Morty I'd seen since our normal Morty, named the Tired Morty. Basically a tired version of the normal Morty. And then his next Morty was pretty normal as well, named the Night Manager Morty, who looked exactly like the Tired Morty, just with some manager clothes on. But then we defeated a Wildman Morty and a Bandana Jerry Morty who was riding a rat. And this guy confused me a little bit because it was a combination of a Morty and a Jerry. But anyways, our last opponent was 40 Morty. Basically just a Morty who had turned 40 years old. A rough 40 at that. So again, we put him out of his misery, defeating Bubblegum Rick and obtaining the second badge of the 5 that we needed. And before entering the portal again, I actually did make a stop at the daycare because if you remember, we got that second Mortian Morty, and you might remember from earlier, there was the combine feature in the daycare. So I thought that maybe I could combine the 2 Mortian Mortys, but it turned out since it was already exotic, it couldn't get any higher, so we couldn't combine them, which was sad, but it wasn't too big of a deal. And within the next dimension, we actually did run into this Morty named the Mega Morty. And this guy had 46 health at level 12, which was pretty tanky, and I'd remembered fighting it in an earlier dimension and knew that it had some attack moves that could deal damage and absorb health from the opponent, just like it did to me right there. So I knew that if the Mortian Morty started to fail, this Morty could back me up. And I'm actually not using my Mortian Morty here because it was one-shotting everything at this point, and since the Mega Morty was a paper type, I was pretty scared to attack it with the Mortian. So instead I just used my other Morty to dwindle his health down and then used the Morty manipulator chip and ended up catching it on the first try. And it was a good thing that I didn't use the Mortian Morty on the Mega Morty because it ended up one-shotting this pocket-sized Morty that I ran into right after. And even though I hadn't done too much research on which Mortys were the best in the game, from fighting all the different types, I'm pretty sure that's one of the more powerful ones. And somehow, after fighting him, I kind of ran into one in the wild, so I knew I had to try and catch him. But then as I went to fight him, I attacked him once and used the manipulator chip on it, but it didn't work and it just broke. And this is where I knew the pocket-sized Morty was insane because this level 12 one-shotted my Mortian Morty at level 16. And if you remember, my Mortian Morty literally has pretty insane defense from the seeds. Right here, I was genuinely mind-blown at what had just happened. And then even worse, as I attacked, my nerd Morty critted and ended up killing the pocket-sized Morty. Thankfully, I did have an item that could revive and fully heal a dead Morty, so I used it on the Mortian Morty. And then somehow I ran into another pocket-sized Morty. But before going up against it, I accidentally ran into this NPC, so I had to quickly take it down. But then as I challenged the pocket-sized Morty, I thought that it could tank one attack as the last one did, but for some reason, this time when I attacked it, it got one-shotted, and it wasn't even a crit. I was pretty confused on why that happened, but I kind of just didn't think much of it and kept going. Eventually making my way to the platform where we went up against the Rick named the scientist known as Rick, whose first Morty was a self-defense Morty that got one-shotted, and then the Sunday best Morty also got one-shotted, the dog bite Morty also got one-shotted, and lastly the ensign Morty also got one-shotted, and we'd obtained the third badge out of the 5 that we needed. In the 4th dimension, I went up against Baldrick, who had this Morty that I hadn't seen before named the Maple Leaf Morte, and I'm pretty sure that's a dig at Canadians. But either way, this fight was important because we got 10 badges in total, meaning we'd unlocked another achievement. In exiting the portal for that one, I entered the portal immediately again, after a couple of minutes finding the Rick of this dimension, which was Robot Rick, who we'd helped earlier, and this guy wasn't much of a threat either, meaning after we defeated him, we'd obtained all the badges we needed to fight the 3rd council member. But before we fought the council member, I ran into this guy who was looking for a purified Fleeb, and after giving him the item, he gave us something pretty cool named the Egg Morty. And at this point, I kind of just assumed that this was similar to an egg in Pokemon, where if you put it on your team and then walk around, it eventually hatch. So that's exactly what I did, and tried to look at what the egg did, hoping that it would just hatch at some point. But I wasn't completely sure, so I continued normally healing my Mortys, walking into the Citadel building where we had Maximum's Rickamus waiting for us. And this was around the point where my Mortian Mortys started just one-shotting everything, even tanky Mortys that had a type advantage. And after defeating the Hammer Morty, Mortian Morty reached level 20, which unlocked another achievement. We're getting closer and closer to that 100%, and we unlocked another achievement after the council member had been beaten. And then I went to open another capsule, which again didn't give me anything that we needed on the team. So I headed straight back through the portal, as this time to get to the 4th council member, we'd need 7 badges. And the Rick within the 1st dimension was named Aqua Rick, and he had some pretty cool Mortys like this Plumbus Master Morty, and even probably the most wholesome Morty in the game named Little Morty, in which it's basically Jerry and Baby Morty. But even though it was wholesome, they still had to go down, as I needed the badge. The 2nd Rick we fought was named Dandy Rick, and the most interesting Morty he had was the Pizza Morty, which we've seen before. And after beating Denim Shorts Morty, which was the last Morty on his team, we got the 2nd badge. The 3rd dimension that we went into is definitely one of the cooler ones because it's kind of like a cave system. Well, it's sort of a combination between a cave and a maze, but the maze only took me like a minute to solve, because even though we got stopped by this NPC, if you saw to the left, we'd found the stage. So after defeating the NPC, we made it to the Rick, who in this case was again the scientist known as Rick, and he had this one Morty named Trover Morty, who I know is good because I see him way later on in the multiplayer mode, but for now, he got one-shotted by my Morty. We saw the carcinogenic Morty once again, and the last Morty was the freaky Atlantis Morty. I don't really even know the real reason for him making that face, but either way, we'd collected the 3rd badge. The 4th Rick was one we'd already seen previously as well, which was Bubblegum Rick, and he had some pretty interesting ones like this face hole summer Morty, and there are actually 2 other versions of that same Morty where the Morty's looking through a different face hole. We also saw this Plumbus Prawn Morty, who also looked pretty disturbing, and this Rick's last Morty was a hippie Morty. In defeating him, we got the 4th badge. The 5th Rick was another familiar face within Robot Rick, who had some pretty bad Mortys, so the 5th badge was obtained easily. The 6th Rick, we once again ran into Mysterious Rick, a pretty reoccurring character, and at first he sent in a Hobo Morty, who we destroyed, and we also got this pretty powerful move for our Mortian Morty named Fierce Lunge, which was pretty unnecessary because all my other moves were already one-shotting everything. But either way, we got the 6th badge and once again had to listen to Mysterious Rick talk about how he'd be the best Rick one day. Within the 7th dimension, there's this NPC carrying a pretty cool Morty named Jet Morty, which was basically just a jet with Morty's eyes on it, and the Rick this time was again Aqua Rick. And though we run into the same Rick multiple times throughout this entire run, they always seem to have different types of Mortys for me to battle against, which I do appreciate. And after beating this Rick, we unlocked the 7th badge, which also meant we'd collected 20 in total, earning another achievement. And getting enough badges for the next big battle, we made our way to the inner citadel where we saw Zeta Alpha Rick. And he had some Mortys I hadn't seen before, like the Wizard Morty, even this pretty cool looking Psychokinetic Morty, but like usual, none of them really stood a chance. And we defeated the 4th council member, unlocking another achievement. And within the exotic capsule this time, we unlocked the Soccer Ball Morty, a pretty freaky looking one. Also at this point, I'd kind of lost hope in the egg, so I nearly took it out of the team, but then I quickly added it back just in case. And it's not like it really mattered what Mortys I brought onto my team, as the only one I was really using was the Mortian one. Oh, and I also used a level up Mega Seed on my Mortian Morty, which gave me another achievement for getting a Morty to level 30. And then afterwards, I went back to the dimension grind, because this time we're gonna need 10 more badges to be able to battle the next council member. And nothing really important happens within this grind that you guys haven't already seen, so I'm skipping straight to the last Rick that we needed to fight, which was Baldrick. And you can see that our Mortian Morty had now made it up to level 38, so it'd been a pretty long time, and the other Mortys still didn't stand a chance. chance. So we unlocked the last badge, which meant that we'd earned 30 badges and gotten another achievement, and now it was time to fight the 5th council member, who ended up being Rictiminus and Chiminus. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, I genuinely struggled to say that name, so I ended up recording that same audio like 10 times over. But though the audio took long, the battle itself took only about a minute and 30 seconds, in which our Mortian Morty made it to level 40, and we unlocked the achievement for defeating the 5th council member. Oh, also here I combined 2 Mortys, which gives us another achievement, but I actually combined a Morty way earlier and kind of forgot to record when I got the achievement, so I wanted to just show y'all proof of me combining a Morty. And you might have seen there in the background, at this point I'd completely lost hope in the egg and just took it out of the team indefinitely. And before we do another dimension grind, I thought it'd be helpful to look at the achievements again, in which we unlocked 13 out of the 17 in the game, meaning the only ones we had left were just defeating trainers and then the last hidden one, which is defeating the last council member. So now it was time to start the dimension grind again, and this time we needed 12 more badges before we could fight the last council member. Oh, and we also ran into this very freaky looking Morty named the Fearhole Morty. I don't really know the lore behind it, but it was definitely scary. And eventually I beat the first Rick of 12, which after fighting this Rick, I actually had a change of mind and wanted to go play the multiplayer mode. So that's exactly where I went. And you can see behind me that I now had a team of 5 Mortys, and that's basically because the capsules in multiplayer mode and everything else was free, just like how it was in the campaign mode. And that's also what had given me confidence in trying to reach the top of the leaderboard in the battle arena. Since everything was free, everyone was on an even playing field. Well, kinda, and you'll see what I mean by that. But for now, I was just fighting random people, leveling up my character level, because if you're unfamiliar, you have to level up your character level, because otherwise, if your Mortys get too over leveled, they'll start disobeying you, which kind of makes it to where I can't just spam the capsules and then feed all my Mortys the level up seed, because they wouldn't obey me and I wouldn't be able to win any matches. But getting curious, I still wanted to battle in the arena, so I made my way over there. Oh, and I'd gotten a pocket-sized Morty from a capsule, so it instantly became the main Morty I was using in multiplayer. And since this was our first battle, our opponent only had 1 Morty at level 5 who we beat easily, gaining 50 points in the arena, which somehow already put us at number 380 on the leaderboard. So this was seeming very possible. And after another win against an easy opponent, I got 39 points, and this shot me up 200 ranks to 166. So my confidence at this point was skyrocketing, but I would soon come to regret this, because the people at the top were genuinely built different. And you'll see those guys when we get there, because for now, I couldn't even handle this guy who had level 30 Mortys, as my main Morty was only at level 13. And seeing how my best attack only did like 30 damage with a crit, I ended up just forfeiting the battle as I was gonna lose anyways, which dropped me down to rank 316, which isn't too bad as my Mortys were very low level and I was confident that I'd get them way higher up using the capsules. And my main goal basically just had to be leveling up my character level so that I could actually make use of the higher level Mortys. And learning kind of how the multiplayer worked, I felt pretty satisfied, so I decided to switch back to the campaign so I could finish it before really indulging into the multiplayer, because I knew it was going to be a pretty long process to get to number 1. And in these higher level dimensions, we're running into a lot of weird Mortys, like this one Time Morty, and then right after this Morty named Apeborg Morty, which doesn't resemble Morty in any way and is basically just a gorilla. There was a hockey stick again named Morte instead of Morty. There was Pickled Morty. There was even Pocket Morty, which kind of caught me off guard since it had the same name as the game. Oh, and checking back with the achievements, I'd also successfully defeated 50 trainers, so we only had 3 more achievements left. And eventually, after a couple hours of grinding, I beat Alien Rick, who carried the last badge that we needed. So I went to the healing center to heal up my Mortys, and then ran straight to the inner citadel, but this time it looked different and tarnished. And walking in, we saw all the council members tied up, with Mysterious Rick in the center, who had now gone crazy and was named Crazy Mysterious Rick. And this was all when it made sense as to why Mysterious Rick kept on appearing over and over again, as he was the main villain of the entire game. And instead of the last battle being a council member, it was actually Mysterious Rick. And starting the battle with him, he first sent out Crazy Cat Morty, who we one-shotted, and then Colossal Head Morty, who also got one-shotted. Third was Phantom Morty, who also got one-shotted. Fourth was Hobo Morty, again, didn't stand a chance. And lastly, it was Mascot Morty, a paper Morty, who of course got one-shotted. So a pretty easy final battle, and we unlocked the achievement for defeating Mysterious Rick. And more importantly, we got back our portal gun. And then some other Ricks came in to seize Mysterious Rick, but before they could take him away, we snatched the cape for ourselves and turned back into normal Rick. And then Rick and Morty had a little bit of talk about how they believed in each other, and that was basically it for the campaign. But of course, we still had 2 achievements left, which was defeating trainers. And this was where I kind of made a mistake, because there's an option where you could restart the whole game, and that's exactly what I did, because I thought that I could get the achievements faster this way, since the NPCs NPCs usually only had 1 to 2 Mortys at the beginning, but for some reason, after defeating any of the NPCs, the achievement numbers kinda just bugged out and wouldn't go up. And I tried a few times, but the number for some reason just didn't seem to budge. So I'm not gonna lie, I didn't want to restart the entire game, so I kinda called it quits on getting the achievement itself, but assumed that I'd just naturally get it as I was battling throughout the multiplayer mode. Like it wouldn't technically appear since the number wasn't changing, but in theory, I'd defeat enough trainers to which I'd eventually get it. I hope that made sense. If not, you can just yell at me in the comments. And before I started the multiplayer journey, I was actually trying to open up the capsules and capture as many Mortys as possible, but even though there was like 500 something, I kept on opening the capsules and the number wasn't budging anymore. And after doing some research, I found out that a lot of the Mortys are tied to weekly events and are only available through those. So there's a lot of Mortys that I wouldn't be able to obtain, meaning we're basically done with the campaign now. So I made my way to the multiplayer, where at first I was just battling battles to get my player level up. As I'd previously mentioned, we needed to be high enough that I could use the very high level Mortys. And I'm skipping a lot of things as is basically just opening up capsules and then using the level up mega seeds on my pocket sized Morty. Oh, and a different thing about multiplayer was that the stat boosts from the other seeds only gave you 1 stat. So it was a lot more balanced than the campaign, as it didn't give you 10 for each seed. And there was a maximum amount you could give to your Morty. And if you look to the top right, you'll see that I'm still level 7, but I have that extremely high level pocket sized Morty. And this was because I cooked up a strategy that I could actually use in the arena, which if you remember, there's the item named Mr. Meeseek's box that basically kills any opponent no matter what. And since I had infinite access to the capsules, it meant that I could get infinite amounts of Mr. Meeseek's boxes. And the disobeying Morty wasn't really a problem anymore. But there was another problem. Every time you used an item, it made it to where you had to wait double amount of the time as last time to use the next item. And to explain that in a more simple manner, the first item you can use immediately, the second item you have to wait 1 turn, the third item you have to wait 2 turns, the fourth item you have to wait 4 turns, and for the fifth item you have to wait 8 turns to be able to use it. And I mentioned 5 item turns because that's the amount of Mortys the people usually have. So you need to be able to use 5 Mr. Meeseek's boxes to win a battle. It was definitely getting pretty technical, but it was also working at first. Like even though the Mortys would be pretty high level and the battles would get very close, there was times I'd get lucky with the pocket-sized Morty and it wouldn't disobey me. And my strategy in mind at first was just leveling up my 1 pocket-sized Morty to level 100, and I thought that'd be enough, but I quickly learned that that was not going to be possible. But for now, I was climbing the ranks as I made it to 127, and then 104, and then even rank 66. But when the players started having higher level Mortys in the 60s, and the Mortys they were using were pretty powerful like the pocket-sized Morty, I realized that this wasn't going to be enough because I was sure to go up against people who literally had level 100 Mortys throughout the entire board. And I found this out pretty quickly as I ran into a guy who had level 80 Mortys. But this wasn't actually a good example as I somehow defeated the guy. But that was mainly due to the reason that the guy didn't have strong Mortys even though they were pretty high level. And winning this battle, I actually made it to rank 28. So I was definitely getting close. But little did I know that this was actually the easy part, because eventually I ran into some players that I stood no chance against. And this was when I really locked into leveling up my character, because I knew if I got a high enough level and my Mortys actually started obeying me, the battles would become very easy. But then something weird happened as I reached level 20. And to explain it simply, the way the multiplayer servers worked, that even though sometimes you'd see real people in the servers moving around, most of the time it was just bots moving around with other people's accounts, which basically made sure that there was always players in the servers when you joined. But then for some reason, when I reached level 20, the game decided that it was going to completely remove the bots and only allow the other players in the server to be real people. And this was sort of a pretty big problem because the servers were practically dead. And I did sometimes end up running into people like this and actually even battled them in real time. But then for some reason, I would just glitch out. I actually did end up finding the guy again, which this time I actually beat him. And the XP gain was actually pretty good as well. But then this is where the problem occurs. Even if I leave the multiplayer mode and join back in, it basically always put me into the same server as the one guy, as he was basically the only person online. And the thing about leveling up is that you need to fight other trainers in order to do it. And when you beat another player one time, they basically never want to fight you again. So I was basically perpetually stuck at level 20 forever. And at one point I realized that I just didn't have enough time because the game was going to shut down the next day. So I had to pivot strategies. And the strategy pivot I had in mind was leveling up every Morty on my team to level 100. This was definitely pretty annoying to do as the capsules didn't always guarantee a level up seed. And if you've been keeping track of the time on the top left in the battle arena, you could tell that I'd just been on here for hours. hours, and most of the time it was spent just opening up capsules and leveling up my Mortys. And I'd gotten 2 more Mortys up to like level 80, but then I ran into people like this who had level 100 Mortys across the board like I'd mentioned earlier, and the battles would be extremely close, but I just couldn't seem to win because of the 8 turn wait time for my item. So I just knew if I wanted that top spot, I was gonna have to level up all of my Mortys to level 100. So slowly but surely I was getting up there, while still fighting in the arena just in case I had a chance with 4 max level Mortys. And I was actually getting pretty high in the leaderboards, with eventually making it to rank 11, even making it to rank 8. And like I mentioned, I got every single Morty to level 100 and was just using the Mr. Meeseek strategy, and it actually worked extremely well until I ran into people like this. And this person named Let's Get Lucky was actually the 3rd placed person on the leaderboard, and their Mortys were so good that even using the Mr. Meeseek strategy and having all of my Mortys at level 100, there was just no beating them. And sadly, this is where I realized that since I couldn't level up my character level, that I had basically peaked at my rank, which was rank 4 on the leaderboard. And looking at the number 1 spot, you can see that that guy had 640 points, which I was still trying to go after, but unlike previously where I was getting 25 to 30 points after every win, now that dwindled down to 12 points, even all the way down to 9 points for a win. But then in the very next game, I'd lose 35 points. So I was basically trapped in a vicious cycle of winning and losing. And if you've been keeping track in the top left with the tournament timer, you might have noticed that from when I started going for this number 1 spot, it had now been 15 hours. And this was a non-stop 15 hours because I couldn't waste any time, as the tournament was going to end and this was the last tournament. But like I mentioned, after trying everything, I kind of deemed it impossible to reach that number 1 spot without actually being able to get my character level up. And though I was sort of sad about this, as I'd spent a pretty long time trying to go for that spot, I do at the same time think that this was actually the correct result. Even though I think I spent a lot of time trying to go for that number 1 spot, if you really think about it, all the other people on the top of that leaderboard probably made it there in a legit way and didn't just spam open their free capsules as the game was about to shut down. So it's probably correct that it didn't end up on the number 1 spot, and that spot was more deserving of the person who was already there, as they'd probably spent a lot of time grinding to get to that spot. And that's basically where this video is gonna kind of just end, as I don't have anything else to do. So for some final thoughts, I really enjoyed the game, and I kind of wish that I knew about it much earlier, because I definitely would have loved the game at its peak when the servers were filled with people. And if you made it this far into the video and you happen to play this game at some point, let me know in the comments who your favorite Morty was. Alright, I'm gonna stop yapping. Bye bye.